A gente vai receber agora um dos maiores especialistas em economia informal nos Estados Unidos. Ele que foi o primeiro economista a alertar sobre a bolha imobiliária que viria a explodir. Falou isso em 2004, PhD em Economia pela Universidade de Auburn, editor da seção de críticas literárias do Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, autor do livro The Economics of Prohibition, ele que também é especialista em Economia da Guerra Civil Americana, bolhas e finanças públicas. Por favor, aplaudam. Mark Thornton.
I want to thank you all for the opportunity to participate in this very important event and to discuss Austrian business cycle theory with you. The first Austrian Economics Conference in Brazil is a pivotal event in intellectual history. The last 2 or 3 years, Austrian economics has grown tremendously as a movement, as an intellectual movement, and it's been great to be part of all that. And then when the Hayek versus Keynes rap video came out, I've just been giddy about Austrian economics. Giddy? And then when I walked into the room this morning at 9:30, I could feel goosebumps in my body. If Austrian economics can come to dominate the economic debate in Brazil, then I have no doubt that it will come to dominate public policy and be a very important influence in world economic affairs. Therefore, it is a tremendous honor to speak to you here today. And also, I've wanted to visit Brazil for many, many years. More than a decade ago, I met a Brazilian man named Ronald, who was from São Paulo. Ronald did not know a word of English, and I did not know a word of Brazilian Portuguese. However, we were somehow able to communicate, and we had a conversation that lasted more than 3 hours. And during that conversation, I was taught everything I ever needed to know about cachaça. Cachaça? I'm still working on the pronunciation. My purpose today is to describe, distinguish, and demonstrate the superiority of the Austrian school's theory of the business cycle. This is called the Austrian business cycle theory, or most simply, the ABC theory. As you will see, there are important methodological and theoretical differences between Austrian theory and mainstream theories, and that these differences are critical. The distinctive differences are not only important for understanding events as they unfold, but they also direct us in the right path of policy reform. The ABC theory is the only true economic theory of the business cycle. It applies economic theory and analysis to the phenomenon we know as the business cycle. And of course, business cycles are simply the periodic increase and decreases in economic activity. Here, a boom is followed by a bust. For decades, mainstream economists have tried to water down this bust phase of the cycle, changing terms like depression and panic into less painful sounding terminology like recession, downturn, slowdown, or even soft landing. The current crisis has mainstream economists in the United States frantically searching for labels to deny reality, but I think the truth is clear to all. Now, what is the cause of this phenomenon we call the business cycle? Karl Marx concluded that business cycles were simply part of the nature of capitalism, and that capitalism was inherently unstable. Now, as bad as his theory is, it turns out to be better, at least in some respect, than those of the mainstream economists. For example, the Keynesians believe that the business cycle is the result of changes in social psychology. Here, the boom is the result of entrepreneurs making investments that are profitable. Then they become comfortable and make more investments that are also profitable. They remain confident and make still more investments. New investors enter the market, and all this investment feeds on itself, creating boom conditions, and boom conditions then encourage lavish spending in the economy. Then, for whatever reason, and you'll actually hear Keynesians say that, for whatever reason, some bad news or some bad data emerges that makes or begins to make investors question the future, to rethink their plans, to become more cautious, to cut back, to retrench. These bad feelings then spread to other investors. Caution and pessimism spread throughout markets. Investments lose their profitability or suffer losses or even become bankrupt. People become depressed, and the economy enters a depression. That's the Keynesian story. Notice that there is no cause for the cycle other than psychology. It's merely changes in psychology that force changes in economic conditions. Markets do not stabilize. Markets only help push the economy further into disequilibrium. And worst of all, the Keynesians blame you for the whole mess. It's your fault. That's pretty key to the Keynesian story. Many non-Keynesian mainstream economists give a similar structure to their business cycle theories, but simply give a different cause. Painting with a broad brush, you can take everybody from Schumpeter to the modern stochastic general equilibrium theorists. They hold that the economy is only potentially stable, but it's actually unstable due to the forces of reality. In other words, the economy would be stable in theory if it were not for such things as technology shocks, or supply shocks, or creative destruction. These are just simply given and are not explained themselves. For example, what causes a technology shock to happen in the first place? And why can't markets make the adjustment even over a period of years? It is precisely these shocks that need to be explained by economic theory. Now, Austrian economists view the business cycle in terms of price theory and time preference. Austrians do not assume the existence of a perfect invisible hand. In fact, the ABC theory must be able to explain precisely why there is this clustering of entrepreneurial errors over the business cycle. For example, there could be something wrong in the institutional settings of the market economy that produces this clustering of male investments. In fact, our investigation can be easily extended because business cycles, after all, are a macroeconomic phenomenon that impacts the entire economy. The two best candidates for the cause of the business cycle, of course, are the interest rate and money. Both of these two things are pervasive throughout the economy. The interest rate in particular is important because of its role in bringing about savings and investment into harmony. If we are trying to determine the cause of this clustering of bad investments, then the interest rate is pivotal to our investigation. In the unhampered market economy, interest is determined by time preference. Some people have an urgent need to consume now, while others have a less urgent need to consume now and can be enticed to save. Interest, it is interest that brings about a harmonious resolution to the value we place on consumption now versus the the value of consumption in the future, as well as the value that we place on the inputs of production. Lower time preferences in society mean a lower value to consumption, and hence more resources are made available to expand the process of production. And so lower time preferences essentially can lead to economic growth. This means that entrepreneurs can undertake more complex production processes that were previously unattainable. For example, dairy farmers can milk their cattle and move the milk directly to their consumers. However, if these same entrepreneurs had enough resources, they could build processing centers, warehouses, and distribution networks that could deliver greater amounts of milk at a lower cost by exploiting economies of scale. Here we have taken a direct process of the dairy farmer going directly to their customer with a new process or a new technology in the broadest sense that is more roundabout, taking the milk to the processing centers and the warehouses and so forth. So it's more roundabout and it's more efficient. Now, the most obvious manifestation of interest in the economy is the interest rate. Every loan has an interest rate associated with it. And this accounts for the size and the risk of the loan, as well as transactions costs. But there is always an underlying interest in all loans. And that interest is the result of time preference. And it is obvious to just about everybody that central banks have the power to manipulate short-term interest rates through their open market operations with banks. It is also clear that they can influence long-term interest rates as well. And furthermore, they can impact the assessment of risk if they have set the precedent of bailing out investors and banks in the past. Now, to the extent that the central bank is active at all in this manner, it must create a distortion in the interest rate in the sense of distorting the market rate that we pay away from that which otherwise would have existed. However, if the central bank lowers the interest rate from that which it otherwise would have been, it sends entrepreneurs a false signal that more resources are now available for their production processes. Meanwhile, that signal also leads consumers to save less and consume more. The combination of increased investment and increased consumption is the boom itself. The fact that promising new technologies are coming into place seem to help justify the fact that this time things are different. Therefore, in Austrian analysis, we do not naively assume the invisible hand or a perfect invisible hand, nor have we discarded the invisible hand. The ABC theory is the result of investigating the invisible hand and diagnosing the problem using what is commonly referred to as microeconomic theory. In this manner, the ABC theory of the business cycle is both realistic and based on economic theory. Now, unlike mainstream economists, Austrian economists view the boom phase of the cycle as the problem, and we view the bust phase of the cycle as the solution. It is during the boom phase of the cycle that all the male investment projects are put into place. These are investments in real estate, construction, and technology and equipment that fundamentally alter the structure of production, just as in the example of the dairy industry. The structure of production is simply the culmination of all the microeconomic aspects of the economy. Along with this reconstruction or reconfiguration of the capital structure of the economy, the labor market is similarly distorted in a manner so as to match the change in the structure of production. During the boom phase of the cycle, all of these investments appear to be highly profitable. Virtually everyone seems to be a business and investment genius. Measured wealth is increasing, and people are borrowing and spending more. They adopt a luxury lifestyle or the excessive and lavish spending on goods and services that is not in sync with typical patterns. All of this continues until the bust phase, when investments are revealed to be malinvestments and wealth plummets. Mainstream economists have come to incorrectly view the boom phase as the normal process of economic growth. In the United States and much of the world, the 1920s was a boom, but mainstream economists called it a new era of prosperity. Similarly, the 1960s, the 1980s, and the 1990s were long booms that mainstream economists and politicians, by the way, considered new eras of perpetual prosperity. They claimed credit for killing off the business cycle. They had modern economic policies and modern technologies. The longer the boom lasted, the more jubilant these mainstream economists became, the cockier they got, the more credit they took for themselves. And in each case, things ended very badly. Austrian economists view the bust phase of the cycle as the solution. It is during this phase when malinvestments are revealed. The revelation sheds light on the cluster of entrepreneurial error that took place during the boom. This revelation also leads to a revaluation of malinvestments. Stock prices, particularly those involved in the boom, decline to reflect the lower value. Real estate prices, particularly those associated with the boom, also decline. And another important component of the correction process is the bankruptcy of businesses and the foreclosure on real estate. These functions take capital assets away from entrepreneurs who are their current owners and place them into the hands of creditor entrepreneurs that become their new owners. This shifting of resources speeds up the process of setting new prices to reflect the new reality and the restructuring of the economy. In panic conditions, these prices may initially appear to be too low, but even under these circumstances, it will attract what are called vulture investors, who are always ready to feast on a free meal of a dead business. One successful vulture investor, however, will soon attract many more investors, and the market eventually establishes an equilibrium that better reflects the new bust reality. Of course, we do feel sorry for those who lose their businesses, but our job here is to explain how the economy recovers and gets people and capital back to work, the process of rebirth. This process also requires labor, particularly those associated with malinvestments, to become unemployed. Wage rates must fall, and wage rates do fall in general. Reemployment occurs when labor is willing to accept the wage that makes the worker's value to the company profitable for employers to hire more workers. Simply put, if workers are willing to accept lower wages and benefits, then they will have a higher probability of keeping their job or of finding a new job. Now, it's important to realize that if you have falling prices for capital and you have falling prices for labor, this is the process which actually helps stabilize the economy. Finally, another adjustment occurs as people consume less and save more. luxury is replaced by frugality. The value or the purchasing power of money increases. People are more cautious and they build their savings, both as a measure to address economic emergency and to take advantage of future increases in the purchasing power of money. Now, the increase in savings helps restore the lost savings that resulted from the boom. Remember that during the boom, there's an increase in investment and an increase in consumption. And of course, the increase in consumption comes about because people are responding to the perception of greater wealth, which ultimately turns out to be spurious or false. During the boom, the increase in investment and spending, if you have both of them going up at the same time, essentially what you're doing is drawing down on your capital or your savings or the economy's pool of funding. Thus, the increased savings during the bust literally provides the building blocks to rebuild the economy and to put people back to work and to restore genuine economic growth. The overall process is one where resources are reallocated and priced. Here, the relative prices of capital assets and labor fall relative to the price of consumer goods. Okay? Consumers are cutting back. The price of capital is falling. The price of labor is falling. But the price of consumer goods is remaining relatively high. Hence, because the price of inputs are falling relative to output prices, basically what you have is profit opportunities emerging and enlarging. So the more that asset prices fall, the more that labor wage rates fall relative to consumer goods, it's opening up profit opportunities for entrepreneurs. And this gets entrepreneurs back to work, piecing together capital with labor to produce for consumers and to take advantage of those opportunities. In terms of public policy, Austrians recommend a hands-off, laissez-faire approach. Markets should be free to adjust. Any attempt to impede this adjustment process only increases the overall burden or economic cost of the bust. It delays the return of prosperity. It delays the return to economic growth. This is actually an ideal time to eliminate regulations, to eliminate taxes, and to eliminate government bureaucracies. Reforms such as those may initially reflect badly in terms of GDP, but it will speed the correction process, the recovery, and lead to much higher rates of economic growth in the future. Attempts to restart the inflationary boom by a central bank are very dangerous. If successful, such monetary policy bailouts only enlarge the problem of the boom and provide investors with a moral hazard. If a central bank is successful in bailing out investors for maybe 2 or 3 small bust cycles, it will warp the perceptions of entrepreneurs and make them insensitive to risk. This, in turn, will only make the ultimate bust much more severe. Fortunately, government statistics are so clumsy and slow, and the legislative process is usually so slow and clumsy that it means the economy can often recover before the government has a chance to intervene. However, if the government and the central bank are quick to act and do so in a significant and sustained manner, it can make the correction process much worse and drawn out. Now, there have been 2 identifiable times in the United States where the central bank has undertaken a sustained effort to sustain a boom and then a sustained effort to fight a bust. I refer to these periods as supercycles. The first episode was the boom of the 20s, the roaring 20s, which was followed by the Great Depression. The second was the boom of the 60s, followed by the great stagflation of the 1970s. So how well does the ABC, or the Austrian business cycle theory, compare to other theories of business cycles in practice? Well, I propose a test of the theory that is going to be heavily biased in favor of mainstream economics and heavily biased against the Austrians. My test question is, how well do economists from the Austrian school predict business cycle crisis? And how well do economists from the mainstream predict economic crisis? Now, what makes this an interesting test is that Austrian economists, of course, are vastly outnumbered by the mainstream, somewhere on the order of 100 to 1. And also, Austrian economists, strictly speaking, do not